Welcome, Rosina, and welcome everybody. This is the second Blackbelt Aunties at the kitchen table conversation. So thank you so much for visiting us here at the University of Victoria, which is located on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Songhees and the Esquimalt Indigenous nations. And I would like to acknowledge that other Lakwanga nations and also Sainish Nation, who's Sem-Chatlan speaking, also have a very special relationship with this land. And to open this kitchen table conversation, what I would like to do also is to bring in another kind of acknowledgement. And this is coming from the Guarani communities in Brazil. And in this acknowledgement, we acknowledge the land first as a living entity, not as a property or as a resource. And we acknowledge that our bodies are also land and sacred. And that the land is in distress and is asking us to do something different. And that aunties would have that knowledge before, but we've been deprived, I think, within modern societies of the technologies available for that. Then there is also an acknowledgement of the ancestors, those who have come before, but also those yet to come, and the different responsibilities we have to different ancestors. So the ancestors who have come before, who have made lots of mistakes, one way of honoring them is actually to correct their mistakes, which is not something that comes to mind very often.
No.
And then to those who are coming after us, we do have a responsibility to say the buck stops here in my generation, and I'll compost as much as I can of this intergenerational trauma. I will not run away from the shit, and I'll try to bring people to compost it with me. And then here we're talking also about not just human ancestors, but non-human ones too. Then there is an acknowledgement of everything that has made it possible for us to be here today. So we acknowledge again the local Indigenous nations, but also all the violence that goes on for us to be able to exist, basically, especially in modern societies, and that we have a responsibility there too. So when we talk about the university, for example, recognizing that racism, colonialism, slavery, sexism are in the DNA of the university, right? And this is where we are. It's a space of learning that is called higher learning, higher education. And it's an acknowledgement also of the violence of the imposition of a universal perspective of what that means, right? Of what learning means, what higher means, what education means. And this imposition was done violently. In the universalization of a single story of progress, development, and civilization is a violent act that imposed through militarization and other forms of colonialism. But the last acknowledgement is the acknowledgement that we are a family from all corners of the world, human and non-human, that is currently in disease. So there is a disease of that in my work and the work of the Gesturing Towards the Colonial Futures Collective, we call separability. So that's the imposed sense of separation between humans and the rest of nature. So that's the arrogant sense that we are not nature. And so there's a call for us to heal this disease, starting with the inherent arrogance by design that separability imprints on us. So it's human exceptionalism, human superiority, then cultural supremacy. So the separability is the root of all forms of hierarchies, of us treating the land as property. And now we are at the point, if we have breached the limits of the planet, that the earth is saying, no more, hold my beer, right? And then let's see what's going to happen here. And I know that in your work, these are things that you have been addressing in your music and in your art. So we will start by seeing what you would have to say about that.
Yeah. Thank you for for having me. Yeah, and all of us for the show that we did. That was quite special.
Yeah, we did have the LAL show yesterday here at UVic, and we would love to talk more about what you have addressed in the show, both through your singing, but also it's not just the singing; it's the creation of a vibrational field. And looking at the stage yesterday, there was a circle above you in neon that kept changing colors, right? That really felt like a portal.
Yeah.
And there was video behind us, and you will see that in the as soon as we wrap up the conversation, the aunties conversation, there is also a video, a recorded video of the concert. So let's start with that. In terms of the concert, how do you think the messages in the concert resonate with this idea of the end of the world and the arrogance of separability?
Well, what's interesting is that Jose Garcia did a lot of the film work and which hopefully people will see in the live show. And we made a previous film with him during the COVID pandemic to a record called Meteors Could Come Down. And at that time, obviously we couldn't, be in share space together, but we had come back from tour, coming from the West Coast and coming along the redwoods and the oceans, and then it hit Seattle, and we had to immediately get out. And we came back to like nothing in Toronto. And then Nick and I and Jose and lots of artists and people, not just artists, but we started to create. We're like, what are we going to do? And because it did feel like the end of the world was hitting. And so then we just organically created the music and worked with Jose, who filmed so much of Guelph and parts of Toronto. And we haven't put that film out either, but hopefully it will come out. And then we stepped into this film, and it was really important that at least for me, I was like, I don't know what we're going to do. I'm not a filmmaker, but I trust you, Jose. We trust each other as a collective. It was very important to show this landscape, Turtle Island of Canada, whatever people wish to call it, from our perspective. So and within music, there's so much Canadian folk music about the waters, and but like from our perspective as new immigrants or just coming from a different place into this space. And so we just made this film, and then Yan, we have a whole team. I think for me, and it's kind of like what we're talking about is, instead of trying to dismantle the music industry or to be a part of it, because I was too empathic to be a part of it. I was like, I just felt too many feelings all the time around it. My instinct has always been to, I'm tired of, and we were very politically active as a band. But my instinct was I'm tired of trying to dismantle this world, this shitty world that's been created over there. So why don't we create we have to live in it, but how do we create our own world collaboratively together? Obviously still having to deal with all the other things that we have to deal with living in a capitalist sort of colonial world, or at least in North America, but we can create magic and create healing and still be fucked up, and do that together. And that's kind of like also Unit 2, the space that we have. It's a very underground space. You've been to it in Toronto. It's just a very underground, queer and trans, people of color, brown and black folks and friends, and so that space has always been about that. Nick and I recognized very early that we didn't want to be a part of this industry. And even the term industry implies destruction, so we just created our own ecosystem as much as we can with the community in Toronto, and then people coming in and out. And it was always about, so many things connect, because even when you said we're family, I've always said that. I've always been like, I see everybody as family, because we all come from some fucked up families too. And so we can, we have to negotiate within those things. And that's how I always approach people until they do something right. But even with family, you got to cut them off sometimes.
Yeah.
or boundaries,
Boundaries.
right? So Unit 2 has always been, Angeloft is a Mohawk artist who's from just outside of Montreal, Gananage. And her work also, she was quite young when she moved to Toronto and she ended up being a roommate and then taught me so much about, she knows Elwood as well, and just so much about care, like, and just caring for people. And I've always had that from the Bangladeshi community that I grew up in. But to have like Ange there, we still work together. We just, and lots of different people have lived there, but the whole intention of Unit 2 was to build something different and build it without control. I always was like, we're not trying to control people. Like, if people want to use a space, our whole vision was like, we're just here to help you figure out how to do that. But do it in a way that's collaborative and solution oriented. You know, there's a problem, but instead of, bitching about the problem, how do we create solutions? And that could have been just going outside, looking at the garbage bin for things or looking around the house for things or whatever.
I want to go back there
Yeah.
for a bit, but you talked about care.
Care.
And care has been
It's overused.
it's overused and
Overused,
saturated.
yes.
But yesterday there were some lyrics that came up around loving differently and honestly,
yeah.
and finding release.
Finding moments of release.
Moments of release.
Mhm.
Can you speak more about?
Well, I might cry. I'm also PMSing a little bit. So.
Messed up, but
we will talk about
that.
talk about that too. But like, so Nick and I we had been together for 27 years as a relationship, and then a musical relationship, 25, 27, we don't know. And then this album is sort of the kind of the breakup of it.
The end of the world.
Yeah.
I
I cry because it's not sad, it's sad, but it's beautiful because we chose not to let our anger or frustration or whatever, our trauma, we worked really hard to make sure that we held that. And then my friend Franny, who was there as the stage manager, she was there for a bunch of it to help us hold that. And then the community. And I'm so honored to still work with Nick and still love him and be in friendship. And so that was part of that, like part of it, but then also realizing in my body, we started so young. I didn't date it. So now I'm exploring. I'm like, let me try, let me be sensual. But that's also something we're not encouraged.
Absolutely.
Especially at a certain age.
Absolutely.
Like I just turned 50 and I'm like, I'm having a great time. I'm like, let me learn about not just my mind and my spirit, but then how do I connect the sensual being into that as well? So
through menopause.
Well, menopause, I just feel like it took me so long to figure out even what state I was in hormonally, and we're often told, people who have, it's bad, but it's like, no. And I'm reading a book called, I don't know if you've read it, The Menopause Brain.
No.
It's brilliant. And I don't know why more people don't know about it. And she's a neuroscientist. And she specifically looks at how the brain is impacted, where most of science has looked at just the parts.
Yeah.
But she looks specifically at the brain. And one of the things she says, it's like, yes, it's difficult and it feels like you're losing your mind, but it's actually necessary because grandmothers are necessary.
Yeah.
She's like, the grandmothers.
It's the transition into grandmothers.
Yes, and the grandmothers take care. So she's like, so don't be all freaked out. Yeah. So she explained, And she says, men have something similar, but it happens much later. But the grandmothers are necessary
earlier
to be able to hold all of this.
Yeah.
And she turns it on its back the book talks a lot about the science, and not just for like cis women, but like she talks about trans folks or queer folks and folks who've had to have forced menopause earlier.
Yeah.
But she changes the context of like, you're not crazy. These are real things that happen. The system has made you. So again, it's the system telling us. And then she gives really beautiful insight on how to deal, but then why it could be evolutionary important. And that just blew, I tell everybody, I think everyone should read it, even if you don't have a period.
I wanted to say menopause before, and what came out was menstruation,
Yeah, yeah.
which is, it's where it starts,
Yeah.
the shaming.
Immediately.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's part of also like changing, I think, the framework, like not. And so I just talk openly now about sensuality, sex, half our shows menopause. And I'm no longer ashamed if I come across like I'm a little bit wild, then so be it. Like just I have to do some work to figure out how to navigate that, but do not shame me.
Yeah.
I will no longer be shamed for being and I'm mad identified anyways. And because I don't think there's necessarily a bad thing with being a little bit crazy or crazy. But again, it's a context of which we look at these things
Yeah.
and how these things are sort of like put on our bodies.
Mhm.
You know, many of us in the queer and trans community, we've reclaimed them.
Mhm.
And not just in those communities, but we reclaim those things. You know, so that's kind of like the journey that I'm on. Like I'm still getting my period, but like it's slowly going. I'm like, "Oh."
I'm the same.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, you know, but there's good books out there
That can help.
that can really help. And just things I feel like organically, I walk in the forest
Mhm.
to the water. Like I started doing that during COVID. I knew I was preparing for something, but I had no idea what. I'm not quite sure. But there's just things that can ground you. And it's funny because science, I feel like I watch a lot of podcasts around science and healing, and science is finally catching up
Mhm.
sort of with healing.
Uh-huh.
And so you're seeing doctors and scientists finally say, you know, these things are important: breathing, meditation, water. Yeah, exactly. Right. I just think it's hilarious that it still takes a scientist or a doctor, like they're not listening to the artists or the healers.
Yeah,
And
and Indigenous people.
yeah, they still need the proof, which is, you know, okay, for sure. But at least people are listening. And all the things that I had put in place on that healing journey for myself are things that they talk about, like get up early and watch the sun change for the sunrise, watch the sunset. Like I just started organically doing changing my diet, walking, you know, and then I was like, oh yeah, okay, this makes sense. Meditation, I just started that recently because I feel like the world's getting crazier
Mhm.
or wilder. So I need to do more to stay kind of like
Grounded, yeah.
grounded, right? But I'm like, how much more can I do?
During menopause.
Hopefully, like, I don't, you know?
It's interesting because it feels there are no elders to this particular time, because we're going through it as a culture, a teenage culture, right?
Yeah.
That needs to find its own way. And yeah, I miss the aunties
Yeah.
who are now the grandmothers. But maybe they just had a different kind of journey, or we lost, which was also true. We interrupted the sharing, the intergenerational sharing.
Yeah, because I come from a Bangladeshi Muslim community. I was raised with amazing artists and, you know, academics and poets and, you know, and they worked their job and they came together and made their art. But why did I mention the Bangladeshi community? Elders. But we never talked about sensuality. We never talked about our periods. It's just kind of like, here's a pad, like, you know, and I'm sure there are some communities and families who do, and more so even now, I think. But we weren't raised to talk about those things, you know, and I'm just like, now I know it's important to talk about it openly and honestly, you know?
Honestly came about again.
Yeah.
Yes.
And to love honestly is, I think there's a song that we have that's called it's called Spectacular. We don't need to be everything to each other.
Yeah.
So in the context of Nick and our relationship, we understood that monogamy is fine. If you want to be monogamous, that's fine. But actually, we can have different kinds of relationships and loves, and that one person does not have to be everything all the time, you know, and whether you.
Because it is a burden.
It can be. It can be, right? And many people are forced into these situations, right? But the idea of, for me, I want to be able to, you know, be more, like I'm gender fluid anyways. I like the idea of fluidness, of being able to like, and to create a world of, you know, where jealousy and envy and hate, and we can have those things, but we can work on those things so that they don't impact us in the same way, you know? So
That's the love differently.
it's a love differently, right? Because I was raised like half the women in my family were arranged, and ranged quite young, didn't have a choice. Some of them did, So I feel like I'm that generation that said, no, like I'm not doing that. And they didn't try to make me do that, but I said, no, I'm not doing that. And, my parents probably, luckily, they've both passed away. So they don't have to be on television. But they raised us with a lot of love, and then we transformed that love with our experience here. Because it did take sort of some information coming from here to challenge me, even though it is in our culture, it's deep, it's just forgotten or it's not addressed or we don't talk about it.
Being in the global north, you mean?
Yes, in the global north. Yeah. Because when I go back to India, it's quite different, but it's still not always talked about. Like there's sculptures, there's all kinds of stuff happening, and it's still kind of like, shh.
It's so interesting. So my family is also one that migrated, but no, my parents are still in the global south, right? So we are the first ones to go through the differences.
Yeah.
And the memory that's coming is that when we first immigrated, I went first to England, and we didn't have much money. We didn't have any money at all, basically, because that is the situation. The currency exchange was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Basically. And in the first week in England, I was couch surfing actually because I didn't have money for the rent yet. And the whole family was coming and I really had to save. And then I bought a bike for 10 pounds. And this bike, I put it on campus. It was one of the first week of my PhD, probably there. And I put the bike on campus, I locked it. And then I went into class, and I think on the way to class, I got a newspaper that was free as well. And it said that there was Prozac in the water in England. They could not take the Prozac out of the water because the water is recycled so many times. And there was so many people on Prozac that we were all drinking Prozac secondhand. And it was very gross. And I just thought about the whole thing that is sold to us, right? From the global south, that this is going to be paradise, that this is going to be at least organized. And then that day, so I went to class and I sat there on my first day thinking, I'm here for a reason, because I do believe that that's something, right? There's a mystery, and the mystery is calling you to be in that place. There's no point resisting or resenting that. So I was there saying to myself and to the universe, whatever reason it is that brought me here, the Prozac thing is a bit gross. Just saying, like, I'm okay. I'm gonna continue here. And then that day, I went back to my bike, and it had been destroyed. So there were local youth that were very agitated and activated by what was happening in the world at that time. It was a very violent neighborhood, actually, around Nottingham University. Violent, not the violence that is on TV, but you could feel it in the air, right? It was especially class struggle. And xenophobia against immigrants and international students as well. So somebody had really bent by kicking my bike, they had bent everything. And then I had to carry this bike because I thought I could still save it. Somebody would help me to the place where I was at. So it was a 5 kilometer, about 3 mile thing that I had to carry it. And in this 3 miles, I was thinking about this crossover, right, into the so-called first world. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about that, because we've been talking about, for example, the discussion about plastic bottles, right?
Well, I laugh a lot, and I tell people whenever someone says something to me that I'm from Bangladesh. Have you been there? And I, even though I was born in Brampton, Ontario, my father was a engineer for Air Canada. And so we would go every year as a child up until I was
Mhm.
10. And then for some years I stopped, and then I kept going.
Mhm.
And so going to Bangladesh as a child, like this would have been in the 80s, it was, Dhaka was beautiful, beautiful city. Like just, and I remember those, and but very lots of poverty,
Mhm.
immense poverty. So that's the flip side of it. And then when you go now, it is so, it's, I still love Dhaka, but it's so industrialized. Like the water is black in the city. Like if you go to Purana Dhaka, which is a beautiful old part of Dhaka where everything is made, plastic clothes, like anything that you trinkets. And when you walk, and it's Purana Dhaka has the Hindus, the Muslims, it's a congregation, Hijra community, working class folks, a very eclectic community. But it's mind blowing to see how much shit we produce
Mhm.
for the rest of
And
the
it's not
world.
sanitized. It is
Yes.
sanitized in the sense of put away and hidden.
No, it's just
It's in your
sold,
face.
and then the impact, and the Bangladeshi community, I should be careful because I'm going back, but they won't know.
There
I'm
you
not,
go.
I'm not on their radar. They do a good job, and right now there's political crap happening right now, but literally the water is black. And I remember being on a noka or a little boat, because you can take them up and down, and just being like, the water is black, like, and that's from all the dyes, from whatever the pollution.
Mhm.
Um, and it's heartbreaking. And so even though it's raised the poverty level, so there's less poverty for sure because of the jobs, the environmental destruction is,
Accelerated.
yeah, and it doesn't get out to the rest of the world. You know, how bad it's being impacted in places like Bangladesh. And so when I see people, harp about certain things, like I call them first world problems, I almost laugh, because I'm just like, have you been to a place where people always talk about the apocalypse is coming? I'm like, there are places where it's been
It's been.
for a long time,
Mhm.
you
And
know,
it's still there.
and it's still there. So for me, it's like, I was privileged enough or lucky enough to be able to go and then keep going, you know, but like, we're lucky. I'm lucky I can just even get water wherever I want. When people say drink 7 liters of water, whatever you drink, I'm like, what about people who don't have access to clean water? Like, we don't need like 8 gallons of water.
Why are you doing? Why are you consuming more than your
Yeah,
fair share?
yeah. But I think being able to go as a child, is what changed, and that empathy that you have, because there's no words. You're just kind of looking around,
Yeah.
and you're feeling it, you
Mhm.
know? I think that's like what really helped me sort of with my empathy, being able to go back,
Mhm.
and then to see, because, people complain all the time here. I'm like, you have a laptop and you have a phone and you have a home. It's like some places don't have any of those things.
It's interesting.
Or we don't even get to see where these things are made because it's not it's in the
Yeah.
global south, it's all being extracted,
I think it's a tuning in, and there is an impossibility to numb to the pain. If you are even a little bit sensitive,
Well, that's the thing.
you just
Yeah,
can't.
yeah,
And when it is sanitized, meaning put away and hidden, and there is an illusion that everything is ordered and and under control,
yeah,
then it's easier for the numbing to take place. But then the problem is that you don't develop it epigenetically
Yeah.
even, right? This ability to be and stay with the pain without drowning in it, because pain is inevitable.
yeah, yeah,
And we have lost the teachings that go
yeah.
with the processing of it. And then when it happens, then people don't know what to do and they get caught in it. And then that pain can turn into anger or resentment, or even scapegoating, frustration, despair.
Yeah.
And that drowning is super painful. It
Yeah.
makes it much worse. And in many ways, collective pain also needs to be processed, and it needs to be processed collectively.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
collective pain is overwhelming for individual hearts. So when we see Indigenous, Black, and people of color, and trans and queer people connecting to a pain and not like in telling other people, like we need more people to sense this pain, to connect to this pain so that it can be processed.
Yes.
It can be moved. But when there's not enough people, what happens is that those who connect with the pain, they attach to the pain because nobody else is looking, right? And then they feel that there's a betrayal. If I let go of this pain, let this pain process, there's a betrayal of the others who are still feeling the pain, and of whom this pain has been invisibilized, right? So we have a problem now, I think, in the community too,
Definitely.
of people really over-identifying with the pain. Pain has also become a currency.
Yeah, and the word self-care.
Mhm.
And for me, it's like, yes, self-care is important, but that has to be done in unison with community care.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the part, but there's been this, like, everybody do self-care.
Yeah.
Like, you still have to like make sure.
That
and not
is a
just
collective
people,
process.
and not just people, right? So I think,
Yeah.
you know, my friend Raven Davis, who's an amazing artist as well, and they told me, like, they're the ones who said to me, oh yeah, our ancestors aren't just people, like it's land.
Yeah.
And when they told me that years ago, everything shifted again. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, I was like, that's
The family.
the family. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which is,
And that pain can be, a lot of our earlier works I recognized when I was writing, the pain that I thought was in my body being in Ontario or in Toronto or Brampton and whatnot, I realized wasn't just my pain. It was the pain of the land itself, the pain of the water, the pain of the community.
Mhm.
And that was also life shifting.
Yeah.
And often a lot of people, well, no, Sarah, you know, I think you've met Sarah. She passed away.
Sarah Rock.
A couple of years ago. And I believe it was Sarah who said this on a panel. She had mentioned, I think it was Sarah, that the Toronto feels something's weird about Toronto. The energies, it's just something stuck.
Mhm.
And she had said that it's because she feels there's so many, it's a meeting place and there's so many rivers,
Mhm.
and all those rivers have just been paved over.
Yeah.
And so if the
It would
water
have been
isn't free,
Sarah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so if the water isn't free, how is that going to impact? And that then again shifted, because everyone's always complaining about Toronto, and then that really made sense. I was like, if the energy of the water is,
If the water is trapped,
I mean, there's so much water,
it's like the water is drowning.
right?
Mhm.
And that just, you know, but the other part is like with the self-care and the healing care, or the healing, it's also become a place to make money, to,
Yeah.
you know, and you have
An industry.
an industry. And so it's those who have the right credentials or the right, who are often the ones who are taking.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you could just speak to somebody on the corner and they know just as much, or they'll offer insight. And it's humbling. It's
The right credential is the stamp that you fit in the box, and you will protect the box to keep the stamp.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is complicated. But like in terms of having pain as a currency too, it was the way capitalism commodified even
everything.
pain.
Yeah, yeah.
And then uses that to set us against each other, or to separate and divide and rule again.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, right?
And because like my mother passed in 2010, which was the hardest thing I'd ever been through in my life. When I went through that pain,
Mhm.
all the other pain was like, oh, this is a lot easier. Like I'd never been through this kind of pain. But I started to understand that grief, and I forget who wrote this too, but like that my rage was actually grief.
Mhm.
Right. And that joy and pain, they're similar.
Mhm.
Grief, or they're very similar things. And to be able to navigate those things without being overwhelmed,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then finding the tools that were not passed
Mhm.
down, but are in our
In our
blood.
bodies.
And
Mhm.
I am able to like find those people
It's
and
like
resources.
reactivating that knowledge in your own
Exactly.
DNA.
Exactly, right? Yeah, and so I kind of been doing that coupled with reading and stuff too, but like so much of it has just been like, okay, something needs to shift, paying attention to our surroundings and our bodies, which we don't often do, mostly because of the phones, like.
Yeah. I want to go back to the part about the industry and lots of people wanting to burn it down, right? And we were talking about the arts industry. Now there's a diversity industry.
Ooh, yeah.
There is a higher education
Yeah.
industry as well. And the difference between burning it down and this other thing you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Can you talk more about that?
Well, and I think, well, it just always like was odd to me because I mean, we were involved with a lot of BLM, the BLM movement in Toronto, early on, so like a year pre-COVID. And what I had witnessed was like in our lifetime, we had seen a whole shift of people be anti-police or criticize the policing in this country. Huge, right? But no one seemed to have the answer of, well, how are you going to deconstruct that? It was just like, take it away. And I was like, that's not gonna work. And so it just always became a question of like, well, how do you actually dismantle this? Right? And that's going to take time. And it's going to take, again, collaboration. And often I think that mentality of like that colonial mentality is in our bodies so heavily that the reaction is that must be taken down immediately.
That's the arrogance again.
That's the arrogance, exactly. And as somebody who participated in, whether I was in an activist scene or an artist scene, literary scene, I kind of just rolled around. I found that same arrogance in every scene.
It's an arrogance of separability, of kind of eliminating the threat, eliminating the other, rather than understanding the honesty of everything, everywhere, all the time, all at once, which is the reality of entanglement, right? And how to navigate that then with more sobriety, maturity, discernment, and accountability. That's we want to kind of move from that and find a certainty that helps us control something and dominate something, and then we have to cleanse so that there's purity, there's perfection, and then we're fine.
No, exactly, exactly. Yeah,
Which is hard. Which is hard. And then again, like when we talked about finding something, not dwelling on the problem, right? But finding a solution. I think where we are at, where we're at right now is that now in this iteration has become also an excuse for people not to deal with the shit. Because then they find a problem they can deal with.
Yeah. That's what there's lots of that.
And then it becomes a escape. It feels like you're doing something, like you're busy, it's busy doing, but at the end of the day, what is necessary? That is difficult and that requires, that has more of an ask of you. Then becomes something else. You kind of consume the doing and solutioning, but you don't. And maybe, so staying with the shit, staying with the trouble, staying with the shit, staying with the problem, maybe it's not the staying with the problem, because at the moment you are facing it, you're already confronting it, then you need to compost that shit to become new soil. Right?
And even like, I recognize too that we, in all these spaces, there's always somebody or a group of people who need to control, whether even if they were lefty activists or like whatever, or right, right-wing bankers, and for me, control became this, for me, I recognized it as a colonial tactic. And even subtly, and then you have to work really hard not to fall for that and do that work. But when you start to do that, magic happens. And even if something is bad, the lessons that you learn are so huge that if you didn't have that experience, it wouldn't have, and again, not everybody learns from those lessons. I learned to learn from even the hardest lessons. That this is actually, I needed to go through this to get to here, or not linear, but like get to wherever. You know what I mean? And that's also something that we're not always taught. It's not in our school, and maybe our families, but often not always,
And that goes counter everything that the modern system teaches us that we should be doing, right?
And the arts too, it's like everyone, even after COVID, my instinct was like, okay, people are going to go back slowly. We're going to learn to be more loving, respectful. People just went from 0 to 100%. Go big, go big, go big. And our instinct was for this record and album and the collaboration between all of us, the love that's shared. Like, we're all friends. We have our shit, but we're all friends, Ian, Victor, who's playing in it. I'm mentioning folks because they were so amazing. James is on the team as well. We just created our own world and using as little, like, obviously there's projectors and there's like a light ring, but my sister's husband made the light ring. He's a welder. We found people in the community, and then we try to keep it simple and not waste. So then can someone else use this light ring? Yeah, go use it. Working with local tech and art communities to like come with us on this journey. And we didn't care. I was like, I don't care if one person shows up, that impact on that person is beautiful. But these industries are always trying to be like more, 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 more. And I'm like, no, like I was hoping that the arts community, and many of us still want to do this, but like it could be small, intimate gatherings. There's something very different when you play in a really, which is also can be really powerful and amazing, but it doesn't always have to be, the aim shouldn't always have to be so big all the time. Because with that bigness comes waste, becomes people taking advantage, all kinds of stuff, jealous, all kinds of stuff happens in those spaces. And I was like, I don't want to do.
You're hiding.
Yeah.
Which is a good strategy.
I'm a bit of a hermit. Yeah.
It's a good strategy. We were talking another day that people who self-promote, it's okay. It's the market, it's capitalism, all of that. But elders who are on demand, you don't get to even get 5 minutes of them because they have a lot to do. And that's why they have to put boundaries on their time so that they can live, right? So the more that people see the magic, the more they will want it. But then most people want to consume it.
That's what I learned this year. Like from unit 2, I had to take a break because that's exactly what I learned. And that's a hard lesson to learn, but also important lesson because.
I once had a conversation with a musician too, saying that people get a high of their music and then they want a high of the person too. And having all those projections placed on you, it's super hard. Or
people they'll dismiss you until they see you perform. And then they're much nicer to you.
There's that too. There's that too.
Yeah.
I get that. You talk about technology and we are close to wrapping up, but I wanted to ask you asked me what my relationship with technology was. And I said, not yet. We will have this conversation later. But what is your relationship with technology?
I really love science, technology, sci-fi. Like I love all that kind of stuff. And I think technology can be powerful if used with the right, I guess, just like if it's the right sort of leadership, that's embracing the technology and what we're using it for and how we're getting that technology. So I think technology can be very powerful. I just think in the North or like in Canada, the US or, Europe, we're so dependent upon it without understanding what it is and how we're getting access to it. Because it's on the backs of the land and people. Mostly from the global South. And so that's where I am in disagreement of it. And it's like, I love space. But do we need to put as much money that we put into space should also be put into what's happening here? Because this is, and so these are my issues. And I think technology like can be really powerful. I just think the leadership is shit.
The stewardship is shit,
Yeah. And the need, again, the greed, the corporate greed.
And then the arrogance again, right?
The
arrogance is what drives this. Then technology just reflects back what you put in it. Right?
Yeah.
But the technology conversation is for another time.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you to do one more last thing for me, because next people will listen to your show.
Okay.
So if you had one invitation for people before they pass to the show part, what would it be?
Like in relation to the music itself or the show itself? I would say just listen.
Mhm.
Just try to listen to it at one time if you can, because it is a journey.
Uh-huh.
But not everybody can do that. So yeah, my first instinct, I invite you to just listen.
Mm.
Because I think that's also, I had to learn to listen.
So if you were to listen, to invite people to listen with a part of their body that is not the usual part that they think listens, what part of the body would you ask them to listen from?
I would probably say from like from their gut.
Mhm,
Yeah. Because often the gut, like we talk about the heart and the brain,
mhm.
but the gut kind of is also encompasses and can fuck you up if you don't, you
I
don't
know.
treat it well, you know? So from a guttural place, I would say, you know, because that will connect in with the heart and the brain. Don't think too much about it. Just,
Okay, the
Yeah.
invitation is there.
yeah.
Rosina,
Yeah. And for those folks who don't, if you're deaf and you don't, or you have hard of hearing, there's bass in the music. So again, from a guttural place, like you just take in the frequency of what we're trying to do.
the vibrational
The
field.
vibration. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you for creating all these vibrational
Oh,
fields
thank you
and
for,
opening portals.
yeah, right? And you too, but all of you as well.
Visiting.
Yeah, yeah,
Visiting us.
yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm really honored, like to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.